there are studies coming out, reports coming out from UK and America that have shown that yes, there is the liver disease is worse in COVID-related patients.
Hey everyone, welcome to SwitchHubTV. It's your host, Wei and John. Today on the show, we have Dr. Devanshi Seth. Dr. Seth is an internationally recognized leader in alcoholic liver research and the founder of a multinational GenomALC Consortium at the forefront of genetic research in this field. Dr. Seth is also passionate about advocating inclusion, diversity, and equity in medical science. She's the founding chair of the Inclusion and Gender Equity Program at the Centenary Institute and is on the Franklin Women Peer Advisory Committee. Dr. Seth, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for the invite. Why?
Yep, thanks for taking the time to be on the show.
Thank you very much.
We just want to start off with how and why did you get into science? Could you just give us a bit of background there?
Yeah, I think as a child, I was of a very curious nature. And I think it comes across in most of the scientists that people are very curious to just know why it happens, how it happens, how can we change it. So I was very much into nature and just asking questions as to why these things happen. And science provides that answer, whether you are studying physics or biology or mathematics or chemistry. There are all these, answers that come through by studying science. So as a child, I was very interested in science. I used to love watching Star Trek and, space travel. And I grew up with David Attenborough's documentaries, watching those documentaries. And they were just fascinating, So my interest in biology just developed from there, I think.
So David Attenborough.
We can all relate.
Yeah.
He's my role model forever.
Yeah, and that sort of got you interested down the path of biology. But it's I guess it's interesting because the scope of his work is really wide, of course, but he's more like what do you call it, like macrobiology, whereas the work that you've sort of been pursuing is genetics and molecular biology. So how did you sort of
where did it
make the connection from that sort of biology to working in molecular biology and genetics and that sort of area of biology?
And it's very specific as well.
Yes, so the specific nature actually comes during my whole journey of being in school and then college and then doing my master's and a PhD. So the specificity, some people actually say that PhD is kind of more and more about less and less until you know everything about nothing. So that's the specificity you go to. But also my whole journey has been, and I say that time and again, it's almost like a particle in Brownian motion. So there is some innate energy that takes me to wherever, but it's also the environmental and other pressures around you, which actually just push you from one direction. So it's like a dust particle. If you see it in the light stream coming through the window and you can see all these dust particles moving very randomly. So my path has been more random. And there have been pressures from outside, which have led me to take the more different aspects of biology. So I started science, biology, then botany, then plant pathology, then virology, molecular genetics. And finally, I'm in medical science doing genetics.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess the main focus or a big focus of your work has been in particular alcoholic liver disease research. How did you get into that sort of I guess field, because that's very specific in itself, of course, as well.
Yes, so like I said, I started with botany. So my experiences were in plant science, plant genetics. And then it just so happened that I came to Australia. So this is like almost 30 years ago now. And I moved, and this was in Perth. Then I moved to Sydney and was looking for something. So again, it was a random chance that an opportunity came through, and it was in alcohol research. once I started working in alcohol research, I've just found that, this was an area which was very neglected, both in research as well as in sort of the medical side of things, the clinical side of things. And there was not much money in it. It's people who are addicted or who are more dependent on alcohol and get liver disease, because it's a very prolonged disease. It takes like 10 years, 15 years to develop. And people in old age, they get it. So it's very neglected. People think that people who drink alcohol and are dependent, it's their own problem. That has been the norm for a very long time in medical science, that it's self-inflicted. So it's a self-inflicted disease, but now we know that it is not, because even any kind of dependence is very genetically manipulated. So since there were like not many people doing this research, I just found this unique niche for myself. And I've been working, so I got into the field in about nearly 20 years ago, and then just grew into this field. And now I've taken the responsibility and the leadership in alcohol research, specifically genetics of liver disease.
Yeah. Could you explain, or could you tell us how you gather your research or gather your studies in the alcohol liver?
Yes, so fortunately, my department is drug health services at the Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. So we get a lot of clients who come for alcohol treatment. Right. I'm also part of the Centenary Institute and work with the liver clinics, liver gastroenterologists. So the liver disease patients who come through the liver clinics in the hospitals, that's another source that we can do clinical research and recruit patients from these two sources. And then I also have this international consortium. So again, I developed this consortium about 10, 11 years ago and invited people who were in alcohol research. So there were clinicians and researchers who were doing alcohol research, specifically in liver hepatology. And they all came on board because this question of why some people who drink excessively get alcoholic liver disease and others who drink to the similar levels don't. So we think that there is a genetic component that actually makes some people more susceptible than others. So this question has been there forever. And so this whole consortium, which has about 30 investigators, it is across 3 continents and 7 countries. So every country, the investigators in each country, again, they help me recruit thousands of people who abuse alcohol or who excessively use alcohol. And that's how we collected, thousands of patients worth of data and samples for doing the genetic studies.
Wow, worldwide. What was your biggest challenges in setting up this consortium? I mean, you also contribute these studies worldwide as well. So what was your biggest challenge?
Logistics, I think.
Logistics.
Initially, just setting up a conference. Mm-hmm. And at the time when we did all this, there was no Zoom, there was nothing like that. We had to use telephone calls and had to set up these telephone calls and managing just the time zones. There are like 6 or 7 time zones, even within Australia, if somebody was from Queensland. In US, we have somebody on the East Coast, somebody in the center, and then someone on the West Coast. In Europe, there's sites in UK and several countries in Europe, like Germany, Switzerland. So the time management, just organizing phone calls with people was a big challenge. That was, I think, the biggest time consumer for me. And then the grant was coming from US. So it's the National Institutes of Health, and there's a division called National Institute of on Alcohol and Alcoholism, so NIAAA. So that is the funding body that we get the funds for this big multinational consortium study. And the ethics and the rules of one government, one state differs so much.
Yeah.
So just setting up the ethics, across this whole worldwide consortium was a nightmare in itself. There are just too many legalities, too many hoops to go through.
I just wanted to touch on some of the technicalities you mentioned. So you were saying during your research, you found that there's certain genetic factors that might predispose someone to, alcohol dependency or alcohol addiction, but also genetic factors that might make them more susceptible to like the damaging effects of alcohol. Can you just talk a little bit about what you found there in terms of dependency, but also people being more susceptible to the effects of alcohol?
So I'll just go a step back a bit before I start talking about the dependency. So like I said, most people who drink don't get cirrhosis. It's only up to about 10 to 15% who do. So we thought that when we started this study, most of the genetic studies up until then had been done comparing the people who had alcohol-related liver disease with healthy controls, so just general population. So people who, and then they discovered these genes that they thought were associated with the liver disease, but they found out that they were not many of them were actually not. And they were more related to the dependent side of things. So alcohol use, not even dependence, but alcohol use, alcohol metabolism. And so for our consortium, we actually designed this study, not comparing it with general population, but just recruiting all the heavy drinking population across whoever was willing to participate, and then separated them on the basis of whether they had liver cirrhosis or not, and then compared these two. So we, when we started to look for the genes or genetic inheritance or genetic association, we thought that it'll be more to do with the liver disease because across the board, everyone was drinking quite heavily. So we would not be able to pick up the dependence genes. And this is what has happened. So from my own study, we have identified some genes, or we call them single nucleotide polymorphism. So that's a single base that changes, and it changes in such a way that the function of that gene changes, whether it could be a regulation or just a protein modification or protein binding or something like that. And all these genes, that most of the genes that we have identified these mutations in also are associated with the non-alcohol related fatty liver. So, people, we are hearing a lot about the NASH and the NAFLD, which is non-alcohol related fatty liver disease. So this was also quite surprising, but also quite interesting that, there is shared genetic risk between the alcohol related and the non-alcohol related liver disease.
Yeah.
But none of them so far, in our study, we have not found anything that is dependence related.
Right.
So these are separate. So we can say that these are separate pathways. So people who are dependent may not necessarily get liver disease, especially the genetic part of it. So the risk is not contributed together.
Yeah. I mean, overall, it sounds like you guys have made a lot of progress, but there's still a ways to go in terms of, some more things to figure out with regards to the genetics and what might predispose people to risk of alcoholic liver disease. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is just the tip of the iceberg. So you identify all these risks, genetic risks, and then we need to find out what these genes actually do and how do they interact with each other, because a person is not carrying a single gene. And this disease is not a single gene disease like thalassemia and other diseases. So this one, because it is controlled or regulated by so many genes, we need to understand how do they interact. And every single gene mutation has got a very small effect. And it just depends on whether a person is carrying 5 of those defects or just single one. And I think that is one of the major sort of basis or fundamental piece of evidence that shows that everyone who drinks cannot get it because they probably are not carrying all these risks. And in and it's not only just genetics. So there's an interaction with the environment, especially for alcohol-related liver cirrhosis. If you don't drink alcohol, you'll never get alcoholic liver disease, right? So you have to drink alcohol. And then there are other risks like obesity, and one of the major ones is age. So because it takes like 10 to 12 years, the older you get, the higher you are at risk of getting this. And then there is the interaction between obesity and diabetes and, several other factors.
One thing that I did want to ask about is, I don't know if it's from peer-reviewed studies yet, but we've heard overall that alcohol consumption has increased during COVID-19 because of people trying to, I guess, cope with the mental pressures of lockdown and, maybe the economic struggles that have occurred due to COVID-19. Has this in any way affected or influenced your research? And do you have any insights that you can share about that? Any sort of trends or patterns or things that you have noticed?
So I've studied, or I actually do follow the literature, which is coming up now recently with the COVID-19. And yes, there is definitely an increase in the alcohol consumption throughout the world because everyone is suffering. I think nobody is spared from this pandemic. And there could be several reasons. People are just sitting at home and they don't have much else to do. They can't meet their friends. So people try to drink and, it's kind of a support system for them that what else can they do? And this has actually led to higher hospitalizations and for liver disease. So there are studies coming out, reports coming out from UK and America that have shown that, yes, there is, the liver disease is worse in COVID-related patients. So they struggle more. The medical sort of susceptibility and the symptoms are greater with liver disease.
Yeah. Did you want to jump in, John?
Yeah, so in regards to that topic, you were taught us about the Wei introduced to you as a founding chair of the Inclusion and Gender Equity Program. Can you tell us a little bit more on your role there as a founder, and what's the vision on that committee or that equity program?
Yes, so the vision is that there is a lot of disparity in women reaching leadership roles. And I think it is across many industries and many fields, but more specifically in the health and medical research. And that's why we got interested in that. So mostly what happens is that when people join, so people come out of school, and at that level or at the undergraduate and graduate level, we have equal number of females and males. Maybe sometimes there are more females at that level. But as you progress through your career, what happens is that you may have heard of the scissor graph, or the crocodile's jaw or something. So there's kind of a cross, So they start from, females start at a higher level, perhaps at the junior levels. And when they come to this age of mid-career, when they are just starting out, and they also reach that age where people are getting married, they get females, especially women, are getting kids, they're buying houses and they have kids, and then they have to stay home. And this is when, everything just drops in their career. By the time, and especially in research area, once you are out of your, and if they take like a year off, the progress in their career is really slowed down because you have not published for a year, you have not progressed in your research for over a year, and the competition is so high, you're not able to either publish for the next 2 to 3 years, you cannot get grants, you're not getting any more students, so your career just dips. And at the same time, the males, they also have kids, and the husband's career just keeps on taking up. And so at the professor level, at the leadership level, at the deans and all, the figures that are given from a 60% from undergraduate or pre-graduation or pre-tertiary education, it drops to about 10 to 12% for females. So there are only, so this is a big loss. There's a big intellectual loss for the whole community and science and research, because these are bright females who just we lose out in the community, in the research community. So that was the goal. And the vision was that we should never be, we should give more platform to these females and remove all these barriers so that the females are able to reach all these leadership roles and progress their careers. And there were some, very small things like giving them small scholarships so that when they have gone on the maternity leave, they can hire somebody to carry forward their research, small things like that. And having Zoom meetings or some kind of meetings, lab meetings, regular lab meetings where these people are invited. So if they want to come back, they can, or if they want to join in sitting at home, they can join in so they don't lose out. They still keep in touch with their group. And then having a small milk room, for example, so that they can express milk and then the mothers can come back much sooner to the labs if you have these kind of facilities. And then invite more people, invite more women to do lectures and give seminars in your institute so that the visibility increases of the females. So there were like little things like that that we wanted to take forward. And pay parity, leave, meeting times. So you have meeting times when there is not, because mostly it is the women's role, the caring role. They are picking up the kids, they're dropping off the kids, kid is sick, so they have to run out. So just meeting times between the hours where women, between 10 or 4, for example. So there are no very early meetings or late meetings to involve them, have more inclusivity and bring in more diversity because they have their own perspective, right, on everything. So that was the vision for Centenary. And while I was the chair, I was chair for about 2.5 years, and I'm still a very active member there. So we are still kind of digging in little woodpeckers, bit by bit to reach parity at every level and get women leadership, get to leadership roles by providing mentoring, by providing training courses, these things.
No, that's great. I appreciate that you not only talked about the challenges and the issues that women face in STEM and I guess more specifically medical science, but also practical solutions that you guys have been and trying to implement. So that was really great for you to share.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, a couple just final questions. What's your advice for people looking to pursue a career in sciences? How can they find out about the different pathways available, and how do they know or find out what's right for them? I mean, it's a bit of a loaded question, but what's
I was about to say that.
Yeah, what's your advice there?
I think first you have to really have that kind of passion, because research is a very, very extremely demanding sort of career, I would say. And it is demanding because right now, the funding is just so limited that some of the most very brilliant scientists are lost to the whole system because it's competitive, extremely competitive. There are no tenure positions available either at the university or at the hospital. And so doing clinical research or even medical research is extremely challenging. So first, a person who wants to do this really have to touch inside, themselves and say that, yes, this is exactly what my passion is. And I would overcome all the hurdles, especially financial, because financial is the biggest hurdle, I think. So that's the first thing. So resilience, because there are a lot of setbacks. I can tell you in my own career, I've just, what I've told you today is all the positive things, but there have been just so many negatives along the way. The rejection, the grant rejection, the paper publication rejection. You don't have any jobs anymore. People actually lose their jobs because the funding finished and their project is. So resilience, I would say, perseverance. And then if you want to decide on a certain field, I think that is more a technical issue. So I would suggest that people who come out of science and they want to take up some kind of research to definitely go through an honors project. And once you are in an honors project, it's a more practical lab-based or whatever project you choose, you get into the real world of science and research. And then you figure out whether you really like it, whether it's for you or not. But honors is a great way to judge or to suss yourself out, and also the field that you are interested in. And there are some great supervisors. We have our projects listed on the university websites, most of them. You can go through that. People can go through that and just read up on that and just call, even before you actually apply, just, send an email or pick up a phone or something and call people and just check them out, have a coffee with them. It's great. Cold calling, I think sometimes is, people are very fearful of that, especially students and juniors, but I think it's a great way. I think as a senior now, I would appreciate if somebody just calls me and say, I'm interested in your research. That's a big boost even now for me. So I believe that most scientists are like that.
We're just out of time, so we'd like to thank you again for being on our show. Really appreciate the insights that you had to share.
Thank you very much for the invite, John and Wei.